Hello, everyone. Welcome to Module 13, the final module in our course. We have reached the point in the course where we are going to bring everything together. Throughout the semester, you have worked through different components of the social media strategy, from understanding audiences and selecting platforms to developing content and measuring results. In this module, we're going to look at how those individual pieces come together to form a complete strategy. This will also help you prepare for your final project, where you will apply what you have learned throughout the semester to the brand you have been working with. The important thing to remember about your final project is that you are not starting from scratch. You have already completed much of the foundational work through your previous assignments. Your job now is to revisit that work, review the feedback if there is any, make any necessary revisions where needed, and integrate everything into one cohesive strategy. So don't simply copy and paste your previous assignments into a presentation. Look at how the different pieces connect and use what you've learned since completing those assignments to strengthen your work. This slide gives you the big picture of what we're doing. A strong social media strategy begins with the brand and the audience. From there, you should establish your objectives, choose the appropriate channels, identify the tactics you will use, develop your content, and determine how success will be measured. Notice that these aren't isolated decisions. Each decision should support the next. For example, your audience should influence your channel selection. Your objectives should influence your tactics. And your objectives should also determine what you measure. That connection between the pieces is what makes this a strategy rather than simply a collection of social media activities. So, in thinking about the project, the first piece is your brand definition. You have already worked on that earlier in the semester, so return to that assignment and think about the feedback you received, if any. Your brand definition should clearly communicate what the brand represents. Think about the brand's identity, the value it provides, what differentiates it from competitors, and ultimately, what you want people to think when they encounter the brand. Your social media strategy should reinforce that definition. If the way a brand behaves on social media doesn't match what the brand says it represents, you definitely have a disconnect. Next, return to your audience research. Remember that saying your audience is women 18 to 35 is not enough. We want to understand who these people actually are. Think about their demographics, yes, but also their psychographics, behaviors, interests, needs, and motivations. This is one of the main principles I want you to carry away from this course. Strategy begins with people, not platforms. So, as I've stated multiple times throughout this course, I don't want you to start by saying, I want to use a certain social media platform, for example, TikTok. Start by asking who you need to reach and then determine whether TikTok or another platform makes sense for that audience. Remember, you have already developed your audience persona earlier in the semester. For your final project, go back to the creative persona you developed for that assignment. Review it, revise it based on my feedback if necessary, and incorporate that completed persona into the final strategy. Your persona should represent a specific member of your target audience based on your research. It should help us understand that person's goals, motivations, behaviors, media habits, and other characteristics that influence how they interact with brands. Do not replace the creative persona you previously developed with a simple list of characteristics. The purpose here is to integrate and improve your work, the work you've already completed. Your persona also needs to connect to your actual target market. Earlier in the semester, you used market research to examine the demographics, psychographics, and characteristics of your local target area. Now, I want you to bring those pieces together. Does the market data support the assumptions you made when developing your audience? Did you discover anything that surprised you? And does the research suggest that you need to refine some parts of your strategy? Remember, research isn't something we include simply because an assumption requires it. It should actually influence the decisions we make. The same applies to your competitive analysis and your opportunities and threats. Return to that earlier work and ask yourself what you learned. What are your competitors doing well on social media? Where are they falling short? What opportunities exist for your brand? And what threats could affect the strategy? The goal isn't simply to describe a competitor. The important question is, what does this information mean for any strategy? Your research should help you identify opportunities to differentiate your brand and make more informed decisions. Next are your SMART objectives. You should already have developed these earlier in the semester, so again, return to that assignment and review your feedback. For the final strategy, you will have a communication objective and a business objective. The communication objective might focus on awareness, engagement, sentiment, or advocacy. A business objective might focus on leads, sales, registrations, or another meaningful organizational action. The important thing is that your objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time based. And also that they connect to the social media strategy you're proposing. As it relates to your KPIs, Module 12 becomes particularly important here. Once you know what you want to accomplish, you need to determine how you will know whether you accomplished it. That's where KPIs and metrics come in. If your objective is to increase engagement, for example, your measurement should actually tell you something about engagement. You might examine shares, comments, saves, or an engagement rate depending on how you've defined the objective. Don't select metrics simply because they're available on a dashboard. Select them because they provide evidence related to your objective. In other words, measure what your objective actually asks you to change. Now we get into the channel strategy. There are two fundamental questions I want you to ask. Is my audience here? And how is my audience using this platform? Those questions should drive your channel selection. You also need to consider the purpose of the platform, the type of content that performs there, and whether the brand realistically has the resources to maintain an effective presence. Remember what we discussed earlier in this course. Your brand does not need to be everywhere. Being on more platforms does not automatically make a strategy stronger. Choosing the right platform for your audience and objectives does. Once you have your objectives and channels, you need tactics. This is where students sometimes confuse an objective with an action. Your objective tells us what you want to accomplish. Your tactic tells us what you're actually going to do to help accomplish it. For example, if your objective is to increase TikTok engagement by 15%, partnering with relevant creators might be one tactic you use to help achieve that objective. You may need several tactics to support an objective. The important thing is that the tactics aren't random activities. You should be able to explain how each tactic supports the larger strategy. Next, you'll move into your content plan. You haven't worked on this throughout the semester. This is new. For the final project, you're developing a plan for one business quarter. Think about the central theme or campaign idea, the types of content you'll create, who that content is designed to reach, how frequently you'll publish, who will create the content, and how you'll promote it. All of these decisions should connect back to the strategy you've already developed. The question isn't simply, what should we post? It's, what should we post to help accomplish your objectives with this particular audience? Remember that the content plan covers approximately 3 months. This is your big picture view. What is the central campaign or idea for the quarter? What messages will you communicate? What type of content will carry those messages? And how frequently will that content appear? If you're planning around a particular season, holiday, product launch, or event, make sure the quarter you select makes sense for the strategy. The content plan gives us the strategic direction. The calendar, which we'll look at next, shows us how the strategy is executed. For the social media calendar, we're narrowing our focus to one representative week. Your calendar should show the channel, the day and time of the post, the content, the topic, the goal that the content supports, and how success will be measured. I should be able to look at your calendar and see the connection to the strategy. If a post appears on the calendar, but you can't explain what objective it supports or why it belongs there, that's a sign that you need to reconsider it. The calendar isn't just a posting schedule, it's the execution of your strategy. One thing I'm intentionally moving away from is the idea that there is one universal posting formula. You may encounter recommendations online telling you exactly how many times a day or week a brand should post. Those recommendations can provide a starting point, but they shouldn't replace strategic judgment. Posting frequency depends on your audience, the platform, the resources available to the organization, the quality of the content, and what your performance data tells you. The goal isn't to post as much as possible. The goal is to establish a frequency that makes sense for your strategy, that the organization can realistically sustain, and that you can evaluate and adjust over time. If you're using multiple channels, remember that consistency does not mean copying and pasting the exact same post everywhere. You can have one overall strategy and one core message while adapting the execution to fit each platform. That might mean changing the format, the copy, the platform features you use, or even the timing. Think back to our platform strategy module. People don't necessarily use Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and other platforms in exactly the same way. Your content should reflect those differences while still maintaining a consistent brand identity and strategic message. Finally, remember that a social media strategy isn't something we create, execute, and never revisit. We measure what happened, interpret what the data means, learn from the results, and refine the strategy. Maybe one content format performed particularly well. Maybe the audience responded differently than expected. Maybe a particular platform drove engagement but very little action. The data gives us information, but as we discussed in Module 12, human interpretation is what turns that information into strategic insight. Measurement should help you make the next decision better. And that brings us back to the big picture. Your brand, Audience research, objectives, channels, tactics, content plan, calendar, and measurement approach should not feel like separate assignments by the time you finish the project. They should work together as one social media strategy. So, as you begin assembling your final project, revisit the work you've completed throughout the semester, review the feedback I've given you, refine anything that needs improvement, and then integrate those pieces into one cohesive plan.